Hello, BookTube. Well, I had a whole bunch of videos planned for today, but by minute, the light is getting dodgier and dodgier as a major rainstorm moves in. So I think I'll just finish up the day's roster with one. We'll meet again in sunnier days, and there'll be plenty more time for videos. But there was one video that I wanted to make, especially. I watched Michael's channel, Fit to Be Read. I'll leave a link to it down below. It's terrific. I mentioned it yesterday. You should subscribe. It's really good. And he did recently a video on his top 10 favorite science fiction short stories. Not the best. He wasn't trying to lay out a critical case. He stresses these are his favorites. And it got me. It hooked me because like Michael, I've read an enormous number of science fiction short stories. And you can't help but make a hierarchy in your head when you do that. So I thought I'd make a response video, and I'll leave a link to his video so you know what I'm talking about. But first I want to go through his choices. He started out with honorable mentions, so things that didn't make the list, but that he still really likes. One of his was Johnny Mnemonic by William Gibson. Then a couple of stories from I, Robot, Nightfall, also by Isaac Asimov, and Desertion, one of the stories in City by Clifford Seamack. But then he goes on to his main list, and I wonder if you'll wonder, is there any overlap with our list? Like, for instance, do we pick the same story or even the same author? His number 10 was The Building by Ursula Le Guin. Then number 9 was The Minority Report by Philip K. Dick. Then The Comet by W.E.B. Du Bois. Then The Regression Test by Woye Talabi. Then number 6 was Repent, Harlequin, Said the TikTok Man by Harlan Ellison. Very nice to see that on there. Number 5 was Speech Sounds by Octavia Butler. Then number 4 was A Chestnut. It was A Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury, which is the ultimate popular imagination source for that whole thing where a butterfly flaps its wings and there's a monsoon on the other side of the world. Chaos theory. The idea that that was lampooned in The Simpsons, where if you travel back in time, you'd better not even break a twig because you have no idea what long-term effects it's going to have. Then number 3 was Three Tales from Sky River by Vandana Singh. His number 2 was Bloodchild, also by Octavia Butler. And finally, his number 1 went to the king of science fiction, Isaac Asimov, with The Last Question. Very interesting top 10 list there. I'm not sure. I've watched all of Michael's videos, and I'm not sure ahead of time that I would have been able to put any of these on this list. In fact, if you'd shown me just these titles, but without their numerical placement, I would probably have assumed that Johnny Mnemonic was on the actual top 10 list and not just a runner-up. But that immediately made me want to make my own list, and that was so much fun to sit and think about how I would do that. And I followed Michael's pattern by doing honorable mentions first. I want to tell you some of my honorable mentions. The first one was And I Awoke and Found Me Here on the Cold Hill's Side by James Tiptree. Who I think is one of the greatest science fiction short story writers of them all. And this is a dark and cautionary story about the downsides of alien interaction with even what appears to be a benevolent alien race. And it was only after I put my list together and was looking back over it that I realized how many cautionary tales there are on my list. And then I realized how many cautionary tales there are on Michael's list. And then I realized how much of science fiction is cautioning against technology in addition to predicting it or celebrating it. A huge amount of science fiction, short stories and novels, are extrapolations on what could go wrong, not what could go right. I found that fascinating. It's a subject for another video, but I loved it. Another runner-up for mine would be Covenant by Elizabeth Bear, and also Sand Kings by George R.R. Martin, who is known now for his doorstop fantasies. But before that, he wrote science fiction and fantasy, and really good on both of them. Night Flyers, for instance, is a long short story of his that's pure science fiction and is fantastic. Sand Kings is a little edges more into horror. If you haven't read it, there's no way that I can do it justice, but it's well worth your time to find and read. But then we get to my top 10. Will there be any overlap with Michael's? Will there be any agreement between my Canasta Club and his Canasta Club? We shall see. My number 10, The 9 Billion Names of God by Arthur C. Clarke. Very much a cautionary tale. You have a group of monks in a lamasery who are slowly, methodically, generation by generation, calculating the 9 billion names of God. knowing that their scriptures tell them that when they reach a conclusion, the numbers don't change, the names don't multiply, that when they get to the 9 billionth name, reality will collapse and they will get bliss. Reality will end, in other words. For a secular scientist, you'd think that's a bad thing, not a good thing. And they are given a computer which can do the multiplication of the 9 billion names of God so much faster. And sure enough, it's very much a cautionary tale. That yes, this computer is a marvel of calculating technology, but maybe you don't want what it will do. And number 9 was Souls by Joanna Russ, a whole world compacted into a short story about, is set in history, as a number of my stories are, set in history, where the prioress of Viking besieged Abbey is not what she seems, and has a way to protect her sisters that isn't anything the Vikings have ever seen before. And it's just marvelously done, layer upon layer of narration. Then number 8 is The Long Chase by Jeffrey Landis, which is a fantastic science fiction short story about a chase between two ships that don't have any humans on them. It's all just AI. There are no humans in the story, nor aliens. There's nothing except machine intelligence. These two ships are chasing each other. The conflict that they were a part of is long over, but they're committed to chasing each other. And they are calculating the physics involved. That's all it is just the physics involved. They know how fast they can move. They know how much distance they have to cover. So they know exactly, it's all just a mathematical proof. You'd think that would make it very boring as a story, but it's gripping, absolutely gripping. Even though there aren't really any variables in doubt, it's still gripping. Then we have number 7, Firewatch by Connie Willis. This is an author who's one of the few exceptions, I would say, in science fiction, an author who does all kinds of time travel related timey-wimey stuff really well, really intelligently. And Firewatch is an excellent example of that, where someone goes back in time to be part of the Firewatch crew on St. Paul's Cathedral in London against the Nazis, against the Blitz. They want to be part of the crew to help save the cathedral, to help get it through the Blitz intact. And the extra irony, the killer irony in the story is that the motivation for the person who's doing that is that in their own era, it's already been destroyed. It did survive the Blitz, but there still isn't any St. Paul's. They're going back to save it, knowing perfectly well they can't save it forever. Just delightful. Absolutely wonderful. Then number 6, we'll find James Tiptree, not just a runner-up, but also on the list, The Women Men Don't See. Fantastic meditation on the relationship between the genders, definitely, and especially in its own time when, the corporate world had many, many secretaries, executive assistants, all typists, all that sort of thing, who were supposed to shut up and be unseen. They were basically extensions of the typewriters and calculators all around them, in the viewpoint of the men who ran those worlds. And in this story, a group of those men and a group of those women are suddenly thrown out of that world, not only into an inhospitable swamp, but into connection with aliens. And it brings everything just marvelously to the fore. James Tiptree's stories stick with you long after you've read them. All of them do. Almost all of them do. Then we have, unlike Michael, I did not put doubles on my list. He has Octavia Butler twice. I thought the places were too precious and there's too many short stories. Otherwise I could have put a lot of James Tiptree on this list, but I didn't. Instead, we'll go on to number 5. And number 5 is, like The Long Chase, fairly contemporary, fairly recent. It's The Man Who Bridged the Mist by K.I.J. Johnson. And it's a world in which two governments are bordered. The border between them is this roiling mist a river of mist, a viscous white kind of mist that has creatures that live in it. And crossing it is very dangerous. It has eddies and currents and seems to have a mind of its own. It's very corrosive. Crossing it, which is necessary as a commerce between these two governments, is very dangerous. The monsters just make it more dangerous. And it's been going on forever. There are tried and true ways to do that, methods and whole cultures set up around how to cross the mist. Then a man comes along with a vision. Again, the portent of the bad parts that could come along with better technology, or at least how new technology will change the world completely. He comes along with a vision to build a bridge, a permanent, high-tech bridge over the mist, to get rid of all of these river accidents, all of these soothsayers and good moods of the mist and bad moods of the mist. Just a bridge. And it's a long story. It takes place over a large amount of time. Totally involving. Totally involving. Wish that it were a novel. If Keyes Johnson has ever made it into a novel, it's missed me completely. Then the next one, number 4, is also a contemporary story, but what can I say? I know science fiction has tons of classic stories. I think it's kind of ironic. I am slightly older than Michael, and yet his story has more classic stuff on it. His list has more classic stories on it than mine does. But this next one is just so good. If you read it, you will agree with me. I feel certain that you will agree with me. It's called My English Name by R.S. Benedict. I don't think I've read anything else by this author. But it's the story of a shapeshifter. It's the story of a shape-shifting entity. But not in the way that we usually think, where the shapeshifter just grows bigger ears or changes the skin color or whatever. This is a being that has no set form, that can shapeshift, but it's not all of a sudden magically going to become the thing it looks like. And it's living in human society. It wants to live in human society, even form friendships, maybe even something more than a friendship with humans. When that's totally impossible, absolutely impossible, for practical reasons. Because the skin that it's wearing is getting thin and needs to be patched up or covered up or stuff like that. But this isn't just magic. Instead, it's if you could put on a skin suit as a shapeshifter, well, how long would it last? And what sorts of things would work and not work with it? You obviously couldn't exercise with your human friends, and a number of other things. Utterly fascinating. The amount of intellectual world building that went into just this creature's existence is bottomless. I just loved it. Also, it works on an emotional level. It will really work on you emotionally. Then number 3, thank God, we have a classic story, Scanners Live in Vain by Cord Rayner Smith, the great Cord Rayner Smith. Again, an author I could have filled a list with. The Ballad of Lost Samel, Alpha Ralpha Boulevard. I could fill a list with Cord Rayner Smith. But Scanners Live in Vain, which I think Michael K. Vaughan or maybe Sean Stanfast would know better than I would. I don't think it originally appeared under his own name, but it's a great story. Again, about the dangers involved in advanced technology. In this case, spaceflight, where there's a group of humans who have themselves surgically altered in order to endure spaceflight, in order to make it possible for other people. They are the pilots, they are the guides, and they have to make themselves basically less than human in order to do that. It's a grueling life. And in the course of this story, which has a lot going on in it, they learn that a scientist has developed a way to do that without altering humans, which you would think in terms of humanity, it's a good thing, but in terms of scanners, it's a bad thing. It means they are not only obsolete, but that they've been maimed and dehumanized for nothing. They originally come up with the idea of killing that scientist and thereby squashing the revelation in order to keep their own place. A very, very interesting the way these science fiction stories look at how people react to new technology. Not everyone in The Man Who Bridged the Mist is happy about the idea of that bridge, and so on and so forth. I don't think it's brought forward any better than in Scanners Live in Vain. So I'm including that, even though it's decades and decades old. It's more in Michael's wheelhouse than mine, because I guess he's an old fogey and I'm not. Then number 2 is an author that I guess he's not that well known to Michael. It's Our Lady of Chernobyl by Greg Egan. Maybe Michael's not a Greg Egan fan. Could be. He's not for everybody. But this is a story about the feverish hunt for a relic, a religious icon of the Virgin Mary, that someone wants really, really bad, even though, why? It's just a lost piece of artwork. But is it intensely radioactive? And if so, how did it get that way in the history of this thing? It unfolds and folds and unfolds. It doesn't have my recurrent theme about be careful what you wish for in terms of technology, but it was too entertaining to leave off the list. I would urge Michael to explore the author Greg Egan. He might find something that he likes. And then finally, number 1, my favorite science fiction short story, ironically enough, has no science fiction in it. It is always in science fiction anthologies. It is by a science fiction author. There is certainly a way that you could call it science fiction. I love it to distraction. I mentioned it a million times on this channel. I'm pretty sure you can't find it anymore, although I'm pretty sure it's not in print as a book, but I bet if you looked around, you could find the story. The story's probably floating around in its entirety. It's The Ugly Chickens by Howard Waldrop. not a household name as a science fiction writer, although when he was writing his short stories and his longer short stories, and even a novel or two, the science fiction writers at the time, when gave interviews, immediately listed him as one of the greatest practitioners of their art. He's forgotten now, but he was known at the time. He was known that this guy who's sending in stories from Texas is doing a really great job. These are great stories. And The Ugly Chickens is about the extermination of the great Mauritius dodo, the big famous dodo, the one with the huge beak and the big plumes, the flightless dodo. It's about how and when dodos went extinct. And it's not what you think. it's that's the science fiction element, is that the story of the dodos has a little bit more to it than you think you know. It is absolutely wonderful and felt and funny at times, and also, oh my God, the ending will break your heart, absolutely break your heart, and it is perfectly orchestrated. It's an even better ending. The ending of Souls by Joanna Russ is also really, really good, but this is an even better ending. Just amazingly good. Not for everybody. A lot of people who like their science fiction will want, more of the science fiction trappings. This story has none of them at all. None whatsoever. If that's not you, or if you'd like to expand, if you type Ugly Chickens by Howard Waldrop into Google, who knows, you might find a copy of the story. But there you go. That is my top 10 favorite science fiction stories with some honorable mentions. It was tremendous fun. As you can see, there was no overlap with Michael's list, none whatsoever. But that's the fun of this, is that we're not working off a canon. If Michael had decided, instead of his top 10 favorite science fiction stories, to make a list of the top 10 best science fiction stories, and if I had done that, I bet our list would have had some overlap. I find it hard to believe that anyone could leave Souls by Joanna Russ off that list. Probably not Firewatch by Connie Willis either. Who knows what it would, maybe even Scanners Live in Vain. Notice all the compromises are happening in my direction. Well, that's because I'm smart. I'm wicked smart. but notice we didn't do that. Neither one of us did that. Instead, we did our favorites. And with favorites, I'd almost be disappointed if there were overlap. And now, of course, you know what I want to say next, right? You science fiction fans that are out there would be the only people who would click on this video. I want your own list. Of course I do. If you read science fiction, I want your own list. Your favorite top 10 list with a few honorable mentions. I of course want to see that. I thought Michael's list was fascinating, and the way that I want to sell the idea to you is it's a great deal of fun to do this. In addition to sharing it, it's a great deal of fun just to sit and think about it and make this list. I was crossing things out and adding things and whatnot. So that's my video for today. That's my top 10 science fiction favorite short stories. And I would love to see yours. Would yours overlap with mine at all? Would they overlap with Michael at all? There's only one way to find out. Thank you, BookTube.